Continuing my journey through 1980s Doctor Who, this is the 1984 annual, which would have been published around the same time as the Five Doctors. So is it full of references to the first 20 years, or just a bunch of random stories as usual? Let's find out. First up is One Doctor, Five Men. This is a decent overview of the first 20 years of the show, with fine illustrations of all five Doctors. The Oxagua incident is the first story, with a very eye-catching illustration of this bizarre-looking alien. Its eyes out on stalks. There's no way the BBC could have pulled that off before CGI. If you're wondering what's going on, the Doctor lands on a planet to pick up some crystals. But Obedi, leader of the Basques, had promised him all the realm he wanted if he would just help him out with a little unpleasantness. Gum. So that's perfectly clear then. The Doctor saves Turlough from a death trap. Turlough says, "Remind me to buy you dinner sometime." The Doctor says, "I might just do that." Are they flirting? Who wrote this? Russell T Davies? Anyway, Gum turns out to be the good guy and saves the day, and it all ends with a humorous TARDIS scene. Well, you know what they say on Capu 2? What do they say on Capu 2? Asked Tegan. Skim bip poom daluns. What does that mean? I've no idea, but they're always saying it on Capu 2. Tegan's laughter rose above the gentle hum of the TARDIS. Hilarious. Then we have a 2-page trivia quiz, questions of who, most of the answers to which were given in the first section of the annual. Some of them are a bit vague. The first Doctor had a young girl companion. Can you name her? Well, that could be Susan or Katrina or Vicky or even Polly. But they mean Susan, as she was the only one mentioned at the start. And the illustrations don't help, as they're all of generic monsters who would have been in the actual show. Winter on Mezique is a much more straightforward story. The TARDIS lands on Mezique, where an Earth colony is plagued by rats eating their grain and a Sasquatch-like creature eating their cattle. But they manage to capture the Yeti with no problem at all, and the Doctor suggests that they can just keep it around and let it eat all the rats. It's not much of a story, in fact it's barely an anecdote. Then we have the creation of Camelot. It starts with the Doctor and Tegan locked in a cell, no mention of Turlough at all. It turns out they've been captured by King Arthur. And the whole story is one long conversation where the Doctor tells the King exactly who he is and reveals everything that's going to happen to him according to the legends, which feels like he's breaking all sorts of rules here. It turns out the Master has been posed as Merlin, which contradicts Battlefield, where the Doctor turns out to be Merlin, but I guess that hasn't been written yet. And the Doctor persuades Arthur not to believe him, so he's sent back to his room, which turns out to be his TARDIS, and he makes his escape. Yeah, so it's very similar to the King's Demons, only minus all the action scenes. So I'm guessing the two stories must have been written around the same time. But it is interesting to see the Master depicted as Roger Delgado, rather than Anthony Ainley. So this is probably the only time you'll get to see the 5th Doctor with the original Master. In Class 4 Renegade, Turlough is back, and it's the best story so far. A wild romp through an alien world that feels more like Star Wars than Doctor Who. The Doctor is hired by this 3-headed guy to find their lost robot. Tegan says, "Well, I do say that you can learn just about all you want about a certain civilization by studying its robotic culture." Which doesn't sound like Tegan if you ask me, but there you go. They travel by hoverhopper to the Melphis Free Zone, a lawless place populated by thieves, runaways, murderers, and mutants of every shape and hue. Sounds like Hartlepool. It turns out the 3-headed man was a smuggler, and the robot was just trying to break free of his organisation. In the end, the robot and the 3-headed man all drown in a vat of acid. And in a wonderfully bleak ending, Tegan decides to keep their remains as a paperweight. So yeah, it's a great story, but I'm not sure the writer's ever seen Doctor Who before. The Volcanist Deal has possibly the worst artwork so far. I could probably do a better job myself, but I'm not going to prove it. The Doctor is travelling just with Turlough, so this must be after Resurrection of the Daleks, which hadn't even been thought of when this came out, so it's very forward-thinking. And they land on the mineral-rich but inhospitable planet Volcanis. There is some nice prose where the Doctor muses on his explorations. He had made contact with hundreds of alien races on thousands of planets, in many different time dimensions, which had been colonised many light years from parent Earth but countless billions of worlds still remained unvisited. No two worlds were alike. Many were terrifying, all were fascinating, and to a seasoned traveller like the Doctor, the proposition of landing on any new planet always made him inwardly cautious, but deliriously happy. So the writing's pretty good. After this, they decide to leave and go to the pleasure planet of Ilium for a lad's holiday. I guess they do eventually end up in Lanzarote, so it's not out of character. There are some fun hallucination scenes where the Doctor's cricket bat turns into a snake, and then the Doctor grows an extra head, so they realise somebody's trying to put them off going to Ilium. When they get there, the Doctor is put on trial and threatened with brainwashing, but then it cuts to him arriving back in the TARDIS and claiming that he solved all the planet's problems off screen and everything's alright again. But it's not clear if that's actually true or the Doctor's just been brainwashed. So it's another good story full of strong ideas. Next we have a behind the scenes feature with interviews from the costume designers and concept artwork of many of the designs from the series, in particular Keeper of Traken, Mordrin Undead and Terminus. So it's all quite interesting, but I would have preferred a few more features like this and maybe one or two less stories. In the Nemertines, the Doctor visits the Brigadier at Unit HQ. Obviously nobody told the writer that the Brig was going to retire in Mordrin Undead, which I guess is understandable, but then the story does feature Turlough. So Mordrin Undead can't have happened, but it has to have happened, so yeah, I'm confused. I guess we just have to accept that this takes place in a parallel universe, where the Brig never retired and Turlough met the Doctor some other way. Anyway, a dead body is found on the Thames, covered in mutant worms. There is a lot of scientific talk about osmosis, and there's even a diagram explaining the whole process. So obviously this was meant as an educational story for children. A lot of it went over my head, to be honest, but basically all the worms end up being destroyed by Gordian and salt. As the bag disappeared beneath the water, there was a tremendous uproar. Lashing worm bodies thrust the salt water into foam, as if the water itself was boiling. Tegan thought of slugs and salt and shuddered, which is pretty disgusting. On the whole, I would say Mordrin Undead was a much better story. The final story is Fungus. This starts with a scene of a woman being graphically attacked by her pet cat. The cat watched her closely, green eyes glinting, almost as if it regarded a mouse. She squatted down on her haunches as she advanced, thinking that perhaps the animal had been in a fight and was still frightened and angry, but drew back with a scream of shock and pain as Boris leapt upon her hand and began to claw at the skin feverishly, snarling and spitting as he did so. Edith snatched her torn and bleeding hand away and watched in horror as the cat began to dash wildly about the room, tearing at carpets, curtains and furniture, shrieking with rage as it did so. Shaking and crying with shock and pain, Edith rushed out of the sitting room and shut the door firmly behind her. Yeah, if any kid reading this has just got a cat for Christmas, they would have been terrified. The Doctor deduces that milk is causing cats to attack people, so he immediately shuts down every dairy in the country, somehow. Turns out an alien fungus has been spreading through milk, but fortunately the Doctor comes up with a way to destroy it. "I think the milk is just the beginning," said the Doctor. "I believe this fungus lives off animal protein, of which milk is a valuable source." "You mean this could spread it to every living thing?" The Doctor nodded. "My goodness," said someone in a shocked whisper, and whistled. As he did so, the fungus on Professor Lloyd's arm relaxed its grip and fell to the floor, quivering weakly. "That's it," exclaimed the Doctor. "I knew I'd get it. They can't bear piercing sound." So the Doctor instructs every radio station in the country to broadcast a high-frequency sound, and Britain is saved from never being able to drink cow's milk ever again. Crazy stuff. Finally, there's Monsters and Ropes, which is basically just snakes and ladders, but instead of snakes, it's just some badly drawn generic monsters. So that is it. A lot of stories, some better than others, and a couple of little features that add some variety, but maybe not enough. So it's not the best of these annuals that I've read, but certainly not the worst. I'll be covering the 1985 annual once I get to the 6th Doctor era. So press subscribe if you like this sort of thing, and I'll see you next time.